Alrighty, welcome back to watching me create this Zodiac fashion show piece. I did want to showcase the fabric again that I used. That more crinkly looking fabric was what I ended up using more so for the corset top piece. As you can see here, I'm basically wanting to create a blueprint or a pattern first so that I know what size piece panels I want to put onto this corset, with my main goal of basically using those panels so that I can keep the movement available in the corset. With these pieces being added, I didn't want just one big piece onto the corset because I felt like I would actually eliminate that ability for the corset to stretch and move with my model. So you can see that I did keep those first two panels together into one larger piece because I figured the middle that actually would be okay to combine those two. I also did really like the fact that this corset itself is a mesh type corset, so I could do a little dotted line in between the boning and then clean up those lines after I took the corset off. And then I also added a little extra stretch room for both the top and the bottom, so I fully stretched out the top and the bottom to make those lines, and then I connected the two from top to bottom. That was just so that I had enough fabric to cover when both the top and bottom were fully stretched. Again, this was the way I figured keeping the movement in the corset would be best. I also did make a little pattern piece to base my sizing off of for those bra pieces. So I did go ahead and give each of these pieces about another inch of spacing when I cut out into the pattern or into the fabric. So I would honestly recommend almost 2 inches if you really haven't done a lot of hidden seams. I mean, I hadn't done a lot of hidden seams, but it worked out okay with the amount of length I had. It just would give you a little bit more movability or workability, I should say, if you've not really done this sort of thing before. And it just lets you work with the fabric a little bit more so than what I had the capability of doing. So now you can see I'm lining up this fabric onto the corset, making sure the pieces look like they are going to fit correctly and cover those sections that I want it to cover. Basically, there will be boning on either side of the fabric that you place on top, and honestly that's fine because of course that extra fabric, once it's sewn on, you will actually be using that extra fabric to fold, like basically tuck under and then do a hidden seam for. So I basically cut out the patterns, and then I tested out how it would sew onto the corset. That first piece worked really well, so I just avoided the boning, but I did sew alongside the boning. And I was doing a corset that has the like glue boning, so even if you sew into it, it's not a big deal as long as you sew really slowly. I didn't have any needles break on me this whole time. So anyways, I followed the boning to know where I wanted to put my sewing needle at, and then as I went, I made sure I was stretching out the corset to that full stretch, both top and bottom. just to verify that I was getting that coverage that I needed, and also trying to keep it as flat surfaced as possible. Now again, the type of fabric I used was a little bit more crinkle looking, and I think that was helpful for any crinkling that did occur. So that was kind of a nice little happy accident with the fabric I was using. And you can see I've done that first line of stitching, and it's pretty clean looking. And then I basically just kept doing the same thing on the corset, putting those panels up, lining them up with the boning. I did pin them down so that that fabric wouldn't shift on me, of course, when it was going through the machine, but I didn't also use a ton of needles either. I wanted it to be a little bit movable. So that's again the next sewn line done. And I did like roll up some of the corset on one side when I was sewing, and that was kind of helpful for my smaller machine to get that fabric in there with the rest of the corset there. So here's just me starting to sew another panel. And when I made these panels from the pattern, I did just do one side of a paper pattern, and then I just flipped that those pattern pieces and made the other side, since they're exactly the same size. So you don't have to like do every single panel in that in paper. So anyways, you can see here that I've got a lot of stretch. So when you stretch out the corset, the fabric follows it. And that was my biggest thing, was I wanted it to be able to move like the corset was built to move. So there's a little bit of flappiness just because of that extra slack of fabric, but again, that's going to be tucked away later, and it does really turn out well. This way I did add those bra pieces on top next, and then I added that big front panel piece. So again, you can see the extra fabric there, but you can kind of see how I layered everything. Of course, you could always mix it up and put the bralette pieces first, or I mean after, and see how that looks more so with things folded in. It just ended up working well there. Now this is me adding that stretchy spandex fabric that I ended up using for the bottoms of this piece, but this is a great way to both clean up those sides of the corset, give it a little bit more interest, and also tie it into the bottom pieces fabric, that shiny purple fabric. So I didn't do the hidden seams for this. Instead, I just folded it over on both sides, figured out where I wanted it to be placed. I did just leave some of the actual corset peeking through because I did have colors of gold and purple for this look, so it worked just fine, and then I didn't have to worry about putting holes in the corset or anything like that. So I just pinned it down, and then I ended up sewing along that folded line on either side. And again, I didn't use so many needles. I just used enough to kind of keep them in place while going through the machine, but I did end up doing like little tweaks here and there while I was sewing. So I just sewed really slow at times to keep that line how I wanted it. And then I did tuck the extra fabric from these pieces, and I did just sew them as is with the fold. I didn't do that at the very bottom of this, which you'll see, but later on I did fold those pieces over as well and just did another line of stitching, and it made it easy for me to clean up both edges. And honestly, the inside of this corset was not really a big concern of mine. I didn't care how it really looked as long as it wasn't uncomfortable. So that was the main thing, is I just tried to get rid of anything in the back that, or I mean the underneath of the corset, that would be itchy or uncomfortable for my model. And this is me just putting the second line of stitching there. That again is along the boning. So I use the boning as kind of my guide a lot through this, and you can see that that turned out pretty good. Now the next part was me doing the hidden seams, which funny enough I learned to do maybe a week before I actually used it on this project. My mom came over and I knew she knew how to do it, so I'm like, would you just show me? And I'm so glad she did, because this is what really cleaned up the corset and made it look so nice, was all the hidden seams. So I'm sure there's a way better video out there than right here of how to do hidden seams, but you're basically tucking that extra fabric under, and then you're sneaking your needle through the fold, and then that other side, the right side of fabric, you're just taking in a little bit of that with your needle, and then you're putting it again through that fold. So it took a while. It definitely was time consuming to do this, but so very worth it. And I mean, you could probably fold it over and sew it in a machine and have kind of the same effect as this, but I didn't really trust myself with a machine yet to that degree, and I've hand stitched a lot, even though this was a new type of sewing for me. So I just had more faith in myself to do this correctly. And you can make a lot of very teeny adjustments when you're hand sewing, so it might not be the most perfect stitch length ever between stitches, but as you can see, it did turn out very clean, and that spacing was pretty accurate. And then here you see like where 3 points kind of came together interestingly, and sometimes you just have to try to make both sides look as close and even as possible, but sometimes it's a little bit of just placing stitches where you can that makes sense. So it's more of an intuitive process than anything else, but as you can see, all that hidden seams is looking pretty nice on this corset now. And again, the bottoms and tops have that extra fabric still, but later on I do fold that under into the underneath of the corset. And at first I just put some holding stitches in to make sure things were flush with the corset on the side that everybody sees. So I just wanted to keep the fabric in place where I really wanted it at that that very seam line, I guess. And then after I did this, I did fold in sections, and I cleaned up this section so that again, we didn't have any rough edges or frayed edges coming loose. So I did do a little bit more of a cleanup job. But anyway, if you would like to see how I transform this further with decorative stuff, that will be my next video.